conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your interest in it. I guess I'm going to introduce you to my audience. Let me know if I've missed out anything because you have such a big profile. So Radha's career is in sports. Radha is the Director of Design and Facilitation at Think Beyond. And she was also the former Loughborough University Athletic Union president so many years ago. How long was that now?
It was a long time ago. It was 2002, 2003. So many of your students may not have even been born.
That's actually true. Considering
I We're going to pretend that.
I was 7 years old at that time. How did you get involved in sports, and what was your motivation in doing what you're currently doing?
So getting involved in the sports industry was something I was always going to do. You know, I don't remember a life without sport in some way, shape or form, whether that's playing or working in it. I've always believed in the power of sport to make a difference, but I also, you know, knew that I couldn't go straight into that as a career. So I've sort of moved left and right through the industry and ended up where I am now. I suppose I always knew that it was amazing and powerful, and it saved my life in many ways. But I didn't really realise how incredible and powerful it could be until I was working where I am now.
Okay. And as a female and person of colour as well, throughout your career, are there any challenges that you may have had to come across to get into where you are?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that I even noticed them at the time, so I don't know how much they were challenges or how much I accepted what was happening. How much of it was about how I felt about myself anyway at the time and the stuff I've had to work through. So a bit of all of it. I mean, I grew up in a time of much more overt racism than there is now. Yeah. I grew up where I was the only person of colour in a very white part of the country. I certainly grew up the only girl playing football and rugby and the other thing. So it was always different from that perspective. And so, you know, for me, I can now look back, given where the world is now, post Me Too, whilst we're in the throes of Black Lives Matters having a second resurgence, where I finally can look back and see how much I let go and how much I blocked off because I was too scared to say anything. And because of my own work that hadn't been done internally. So, you know, I can see examples where I have been assumed to be the tea lady, for example.
What does that mean?
So I was in a meeting, I'm happy to say who it was. I was in a meeting at the Football Association when I worked in football. I was going to present to a fairly senior committee, and I was there in a suit, and the other sort of blazered old white men in the room said they wanted tea and coffee. And I said, that would be nice. And then when I stood up to present, they didn't quite know what to do. And I sort of brushed it off. And I've had, you know, you have those sort of off the cuff remarks that people make that you ignore because it's safe to do. But I have stopped doing that. Yeah. Only in the past few months, it's really been this latest time around the block in terms of, you know, Black Lives Matters were protesting years ago. My youngest sister was arrested once for protesting as part of them, and I'm so proud of her for standing up for that and building a bandwagon, not jumping on it, and knowing what she's standing up for. And you know, I didn't really know where I stood in all of it, and now I can see it as much my responsibility to call it out and not let it slide. And I've had to call it out a couple of times recently, and I found it really painful because it's
painful, you know, for you or for the person.
For me, I found it painful for me because I also have to own and admit that I rejected my own heritage because it felt safer to do so when I was younger, you know, because I didn't want to be different. But I was, and I am, and I'm okay with it now.
And I think that's such a significant thing because growing up, we recognize certain ways that we're being treated different, but because we don't want to make a fuss potentially about it, we move on and we let it slide. But for people, for example, for people who are still doing that till today, like, what would you tell them? Because speaking up is one thing, but being uncomfortable speaking up, because it is uncomfortable to have such a conversation, because when you're speaking to the person, it comes across as though there's something wrong with you and not them. It's a bit of gaslighting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit of gaslighting.
I would say now is the time. You know, as uncomfortable as it has been, it's been liberating to a certain extent. And also it's made me really, like, I understand why things are swept under the carpet. If I think about, you know, generational trauma and the fact that both of my parents were effectively thrown out of their countries of origin purely because of empire, you know, and whilst the Commonwealth and England did accept them back in, it wasn't an easy transition, and of course they needed to fly under the radar because of everything that was happening in that time. So I understand that they wanted to protect and save, and you know, now I can see that as uncomfortable as it is, I do believe that the large majority of the world is ready to be challenged and is much more receptive to it, particularly in the workspace. And certainly in my industry. You know, I did challenge a couple of people in the industry recently, and they've been open to, you know, to the challenge. What they go and do going forward now, now that I've called things out, is up to them. But calling it out is my part, really.
Yeah. For those sort of organizations, how do you exactly work with them? Do they call you in to coach them on the right approaches to take? Are you part of the streamlining process of dealing with any discriminational thing that might happen in the organization?
No, that's not really where sort of my role is. If an organisation was to come to us as a consultancy and ask for help in their diversity and inclusion, we would absolutely do that, but we wouldn't do that because I'm a person of colour. And certainly when an organisation, if I call them out and they say, well, what should we do? I'm not going to give them the answer because I'm not the problem, you know? And I don't believe that the answer comes from people of colour telling those in power, those that have created, or those institutions that have the power, that happen to be led by those not of colour and often not female. I don't think the answer comes from us telling them what to do. It comes from them doing their own work and understanding their own privilege, and understanding that having privilege doesn't mean that you haven't had a tough life and that things aren't difficult for you. It just means that your life hasn't been made tougher by the colour of your skin. You haven't been stopped, prevented, actively dismissed or anything for doing so for the colour of your skin. So my guidance always is, I'm not going to give you the answers. Please go away and work out what you feel you need to learn and understand, and then make decisions as to what is the right thing to do, and then use your privilege and power to do the right thing. But I don't believe it's our responsibility to fix it. I think everyone's part of the solution, but I don't think we should be dictating what other people do, because suddenly it becomes obligation and none of it's authentic, and we end up back at tokenism.
I think tokenism is one big issue right now, and I don't know what the resolution as such is, because, for example, in an organization where a person of color is appointed at potentially a senior executive level, and that person goes on to do amazing things, some people would still see it as tokenistic. But how can they see it from another different lens, like from another perspective?
You know what? I honestly don't care about those people.
Yeah.
I feel like if you go in and do a job and you know you've done a good job and you got the job because you're bright enough to, and you're the best person for it, and because the system has allowed you to be in the position to get that job, because at the moment I don't think there's a lack of talent or ability anywhere. There's just a lack of visibility and a lack of options, and also just a laziness in recruitment in many areas.
Yeah.
So I feel as though when people are selected based on merit, which they always will be, if you do it properly, then if you've done a good job yourself, you know you've done a good job. If other people are seeing it as tokenism, you're not going to change them until they go and do their own work. As long as you don't apologize for your success,
Yeah.
you know, say, oh, I know I'm really lucky that I got this role because I'm X, Y, and Z, but I've done a good job now that I was lucky enough to get it. No, I got it because someone made a playing field a little more level so I could stand on it next to my peers. I was selected because I was the best in the bunch, and then I went and performed. You know, that for me is really, you know, being unapologetic about things now is sort of where I am trying to be. It's really hard. It's like a real challenge on a daily basis for me.
And just on that note of not telling organizations what to do, in a situation where they go on to do something and potentially they don't do it right, and people say, oh, this is not the approach to take, and they do say that, oh, they were advised to take the best approach that they assumed was right for the company, what happens then? Because from what I've seen so far, people of color are indeed tired of having to explain how to be treated right. We shouldn't have to do that. That shouldn't be the case at all.
It's when people say things like, but I don't see colour, that my blood boils, because I'm like, so you're just dismissing the facts that generations and generations have experienced institutional racism because you don't see colour. And I think people say it with the right intent, but I ultimately the only change will happen is when the education system actually talks about history and civics and society in a way that is honest and truthful and not whitewashed, because then it will make sense, you know, then it will make sense. I'm not saying that you shouldn't involve people of colour in your decision making, but I feel like none of it can happen until people that have the ability to make those decisions have done a bit of education, have learned a bit, have challenged their own misconceptions and preconceptions.
Yeah, you're right. I came across a recent report that said that racial discrimination and slurs had gone up by 42% in football. And I was shocked by that number, I must say. I don't know if the data is right, but it was from ITV News. And I'm just wondering, why is it still very much prevalent, considering, you know, the role models that you find in sports? Why is it that racial discrimination is becoming much more worse?
So, I mean, there's sort of two things there. Number one, I haven't seen the data, so I won't necessarily talk to that directly. What I do know is that reporting of it has increased. So that might just be the reporting of it. I know Kick It Out have done a really good job in terms of making it easier to report the various apps that they have. So I do wonder whether it's not that the actual volume of racism is increased, but our visibility of it has increased, and the reporting of it has increased, which is obviously a good thing, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah.
It baffles me that it still happens. You know, I my favourite sports person, and anyone that knows me will know this about me, because that's one of the earliest things you learn about me is John Barnes. And, you know, and as a kid, I didn't even realise why I had, you know, we're not even the same colour, right? We're not from, you know, we don't have the same heritage, but he played for my team, and you know, he's always been my hero. And he's always been at the front and centre of that race debate. And here we are, all of these years later, very many years later, 30 plus, and the conversation, yes, it's moved on, and yes, it's got better, but it's still not gone. So I do wonder whether it's more about visibility and reporting, which is a good thing, but it's not a good thing that it still exists, you know, with the ultras and the NF and people using the beautiful game for their own means. They're not football fans. I don't consider them football fans. I think clubs are doing a better job of lifetime bans for those that are caught. I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for that. And I just think it's about using all of the tools at our disposal to show that this is not acceptable, and that does mean lifetime bans, as far as I'm concerned. And if clubs aren't taking responsibility, I do see it as the national federations and the international federations' responsibility to ban them.
Yeah. So in terms of it being addressed, do you think that lifetime bans are good enough, or are there other things that could be put in place to stop it?
I mean, if it's against the law, it's against the law.
It is,
you know,
yeah.
It's so that's basically where it is. If I really felt as though they were true sports fans and true football fans, you'd want to dock points of the club, but I'm not sure that would make any difference, because I really question whether they actually care about the club and the players. I'm not sure that it would ever really make a difference, but I think can only be a legislative piece that does it. Obviously the answer is education, reducing ignorance, but that it's got to be run on the same track as there being punitive responses where the law has been broken.
Yeah.
So the law needs to be tough enough.
A few days ago, I was speaking to a friend, and it seems as though we've gone through all this many years, but we are still in the same point. And what is indeed the way forward? Yes, there's lifetime bans being set in stone, and some clubs, like you said, are becoming more stricter. But do you feel as though we're still in the same spot, or is there progress so far?
I mean, it's really hard, because I look around and where are the coaches of colour? And actually, I don't really, maybe let's be a bit more specific about this. Where are the Asian players? There's, we talk about Black and minority ethnic communities as one homogenous group, and they're not, and we're not. You and I are different. I didn't play football against another person of any other colour until I was probably 17 years old, and I started playing team football against other teams at the age of 10 or 11. And the first time I played against someone of South Asian heritage was when I was playing county hockey. And I was playing against another county, a county that is known to have a high level of South Asian population, and they had one Asian player as well. So, I haven't seen many. I do feel as though there's still a level of lack of representation, across all types of ethnicity that are reflective of the ethnicity groups within this country, but also at all levels and all forms of the game, whether that's refereeing, whether that's coaching, whether that's managing, whether that's in senior roles in administration, across all sports. If we look at all of our medal winners at the various Olympic Games, are they reflective of the communities of this country? And I know that that's something the UK sport are really passionate about changing, and diversifying the nature of those winners and the nature of the heroes and role models we get to see.
And just on that note, we do have, in terms of gender, we do have less females partaking in sports than male. Is it something that they would be looking at as well, or is it going to be based on heritage?
The sports industry, for as long as I've known it, has been trying to work on diversity in its entirety, inclusion to a slightly lesser extent, and sometimes we forget about that. So, I think when we start talking about stuff like this, you can't help but start thinking about intersectionality and the layers and layers and layers of disadvantage that come upon one another. So we can't tackle everything as single silos. This is about really meeting people where they are at with what they're at, and really using a range of things, and also not thinking that sport is the answer for everyone. I love sport, I'm through and through, but it's not for everyone. I believe that it's really important for everyone to be able to move their bodies in a way that makes them feel happy and joy and active. For some people, it's going to be the stuff that I might do, getting in the boxing ring, running around, being a bit of a wally, fine. For some people, it's going to be dancing, and that scares the life out of me, that I'm never going to do that. But for some people, that's utter joy for them. And I just feel like movement is really important in whatever way it is. Yes, I absolutely believe in what sport offers over and above that. And I believe that used with intention, used with great programming, curriculum, infrastructure and purpose, sport can do marvellous things, but it isn't the answer to everything. It is a contributor to. So yes, I think it's important that we look at things across the piece and we look at how different layers of disadvantage come together at these various intersections to make things far harder for those for whom it's already difficult. And instead of trying to solve things one line at a time, we need to look at solutions that are about where people are at. I'll tell you one story about Dame Tanny, Baroness, in fact, Tanny Gray Thompson. One of the things that I will always remember her saying is that she has never really been discriminated against because she's a woman, because the first level of discrimination she receives is because she has a disability, So that takes precedence in the levels of discrimination, And so we need to look at things slightly differently in order to address them. We can't see it as in silos, because we'll never solve it, because this is layer upon layer of stuff. I do think that This Girl Can has done a really good job. I think it's made, and it's tangibly made a difference. I think things like the intentional way that England hockey and England netball and the ECB in cricket approached their elite team's success on the field of play, the way that they put the groundwork down so that immediately that a young boy or girl was inspired by watching it, they could go and access that sport. That was clever, because it's not it's not this magic thing. You play sport, you're a better person. You watch sport, you're inspired by someone, you're able to go and do it. It's not that simple. The structures don't allow for that. And sport isn't magic. But if we use it well, we design it well, then it can do great things. But we have to be intentional about it. It's not going to happen just because we hope it will, despite what many people will tell you, that if you play, for example, if you play rugby, you're a better human. It's not true.
Is that a thing? I've never heard that before.
I think that's true. I think there's a thing about rugby building character. Yeah, I'm sure it does, but only when we use it intentionally. And I believe that's true, that all sports can do that. And so I'm pretty sport agnostic. I don't mind what people play. I think as long as you're doing something you love, and if that's not sport, as long as you're moving your body and you're healthy as you can be, then great.
Yeah. Are there any projects your organization is working on in terms of accessibility, especially for people from low-income backgrounds?
Yeah, I mean, across the work that we do, it really obviously is client-led and client-dependent, but certainly, any work any conversations we've had with Sport England have always been around how we can work with them to really identify and look at low socioeconomic groups. We're doing some really interesting work with various major sporting bodies, both in the US and over here, around all of that. So I do think that there's a lot that all of these organisations are doing. I think understanding the root cause of problems and understanding at which point does sport, exercise, movement, activity play a role is really, really important. And we work really closely with, various national governing bodies, major leagues out in the US, international federations, but also brands and individuals who really care about providing access and opportunities to those that would otherwise not get them. And there are some incredible organizations out there doing really brilliant stuff, and recognizing that sometimes it's not about the academic numbers that you have. It's really, well, maybe that young person didn't get those A levels because they're also a full-time carer, and they've also got to, work 2 jobs just to make sure that there's food on the table. And, you know, we don't know what home lives people have come from, you know. People walk into our lives and into rooms and you don't know what they bring with them, you know, and we can't make assumptions about it. So different ways to measure ability, I think, are super important, and different access routes into whether that's apprenticeships, whether that's different ways. I mean, if nothing else positive, COVID has taught us that there are different ways in which we can do things that we thought we could only do in one way. You know, and I feel like there's an opportunity for us to harness that essence to try and level out a very uneven world that we're in.
Yeah. I did have a question regarding facilities. So in that line of accessibility, because within Bristol, it still said that facilities are not accessible, they're not affordable for people from low-income backgrounds. Do you think there's a communication piece around there that there are, but people do not know about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's specific to scenarios, but I do think that in general, you know, people look at their branding, if people look at what you see when you drive past, does it look like a place where you're welcome? You know, those things are, I'll give you a really, it's not a silly example actually. The mother of my goddaughter just moved house, and at the bottom of their road is an estate agent. And the estate agent's window has a massive poster in it, and it is all white men in the poster, which I think there's one woman, but I think her face has been cut off. I'm like, wow, that tells me what area I'm living, what area we're living in. That tells me who's allowed in this shop. You know, it's those things that are
subliminal messages.
That is exactly. I don't think it's intentional, but it is institutionalized because that lack of consciousness. Because, you know, if you're seeing yourself and you're posting up there, you're like, that's a cool poster, I look all right in that, you know, as opposed to, wow, we all look the same in this, you know. It says something to people that I don't think businesses should be allowed to say anymore.
Yeah.
You know, but I think that you know, there's a marketing piece, there's a communications piece for sure, but there's also a very practical and infrastructure piece. You know, are they truly accessible? Are they affordable? And this is where amazing public, private, and third sector partnerships can come together and achieve really good things. You know, investment in facilities that as part of those contracts has hours, specific hours that are available at a lower rate, and some of those other hours are paid for at a peak level that subsidizes it. And, you know, there are organizations that have been doing this for years, but it's just really whether it's enforceable and whether access to playing fields is available. And, you know, we're in a different world to the world I grew up in. I grew up in a world where I could run around in our little village, playing on the various fields, jumpers for goalposts, all of that sort of stuff. Yeah. The world's changed. It's less safe than it was. And there's more, and whether it's less safe in reality or it's less safe in perception is either way. But we live in a much more fear-based society because of everything that's happened and was allowed to happen before us. So the ability for kids to go out and have a run around is slightly different.
Back home in Nigeria, I wouldn't be able to leave the house past 7-8 o'clock, and anytime my parents do come here and I leave them in the hotel at around 10-11, they're like, oh my god, you can't go, you have to stay. And I'm like, oh no, I can actually return home safe and sound. Like, no, it's not safe out there. So I do get what you mean.
My folks still do the same to me. And I'm almost 40. If I'm driving home, they're like, will you text me when you get home? I'm like, I've lived years and I've never texted you when I got home from my life, but okay, I will. And it's only because they love us, but yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I would say personally, my experience with sports has changed since I came to this country. I can't pinpoint exactly what it is, but back home, primary school, high school, I was very much engaged in table tennis, in football, basketball, and volleyball. Those were my key areas. But coming here, I just lost it. And I'm not sure what it was per se, but I didn't really know people of my skin color who were engaged in such activities. So it was easier for me to carry on doing other things. So being involved in societies, part-time working as well. But I didn't necessarily push for something that I was quite keen on in the past. And yeah, I don't know what it is, but for students at UWE, I would like their experience to be different. So on that note, are there things that you would say to females or students of color who, you know, have that background in sports and have just lost touch? How would you encourage them to, you know, stay connected with that?
So I guess for me, I was lucky that, yes, I was the only one, but there's something about sport that I cannot get out of my system. It's just who I am, and it just makes me happy.
That.
Yeah, you know. So from my perspective, I was going to do it anyway. Mm-hmm. But what I would say, but I do get that thing of, oh, I'm not sure it's for me, or I'm not sure that I'll fit in. And partly I think it's, I don't know, I think it's a combination of both individuals saying, oh, hang on, I want this, and I'm allowed this, and I'm good enough for this, and it is okay for me too. But also, it's also about spaces, places, people being welcoming and open and reflective of inclusion. You know, not we are inclusive, just don't tell me, show me through your actions what you are going to do. You know, show me through your actions, don't tell me.
Mm-hmm. You did make a point earlier about diversity and inclusion. Do you think organizations mistake the two, that they don't fully understand?
One word, you know, there's, you know, you can have a diverse workforce, whether it feels inclusive or not is an entirely different prospect. You know, does it work for everyone? You could have a diverse workforce with various people with various different physical disabilities, intellectual disabilities, health disabilities, but your office space might not be inclusive of them, and might not allow for them to fully participate. You know, I just, you know, are people able to fully participate in life? It is the question, right? And that's ultimately what this comes down to. Or do systems and those that run the systems prevent them from doing so? And it's kind of, you know, I feel like systemic change is what needs to happen, and that's possible. It is possible. I'm not an expert in all of this. You know, you speak to my little sister and you'll get a far more comprehensive understanding, practical thing. But I guess what I would say from, you know, I'm not an expert in this, but I am someone that has lived experience of rejecting their heritage for a long time. Now understanding why I did that, not being proud of it, feeling quite ashamed that I did that. And I feel sad that I did that, but I did. And now what can I do now looking forward to embrace it and be proud of it, and not allow myself to make jokes of things because I'm scared to call them out. Because that's what I did for 20 years. I made a joke of it because it felt safer, you know? And now that's not where the world's at, and I have a responsibility, because I do happen to have a visible role within our business and with some wider networks in sport, that I do believe I have a responsibility to step up to the plate myself, and I haven't been. So for me, that's been really important over the past few months.
Okay. That's a really good point, because like you said, it just feels much safer not having to, you know, confront a situation, confront a person, have that difficult conversation, because till date, it is generally uncomfortable. Do you think sports has a huge part to play in the overall university experience?
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, I went to Loughborough, so I'm slightly biased about this. And But I went to play, and don't get me wrong, I have no massive amounts of talent. I am a hard worker though, and my brain talent is better than my physical talent, so I'm able to think and train clever and train technically so that I can keep up. But so I went to play, but I got injured in the summer of my freshman year, and I haven't really been able to play competitive sport since. But in terms of my university experience, I was still part of the sporting infrastructure there, and obviously that resulted in me being AU president there. And I think that it's a wonderful thing. I just feel the more time I spend working in it, the more I understand that it's part of the puzzle. It isn't all of it. I love it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's saved my life on many occasions. It's broken my heart on many occasions. It's my network of friends has a huge amount of crossover with my love of sports. It's what I hope to share with my goddaughter, who's got this insane left foot. She's 4 years old and she just dribbles a ball as though she was born with it. So we're not doing anything with her. We're just letting her explore that. She's like this naturally physically gifted kid. And I get to be, the godmother that takes her to football and tennis and rugby and whatever she wants to do, having fun. So for me, there's so much joy. It's how I connected with my father. I'm a Liverpool fan because he brought me up as a Liverpool fan, because that was his first experience in this country, I'm a cricket fan because he taught me the rules of it, my mother's a runner, it's that sort of stuff. And so it's just a huge part of my life. My little sister, bless her, she had no choice but to play because I made her stand and pass the ball back to me time and time again. Luckily, she's found her own way, and we both now box. As it happens, just accidentally, we both ended up, really loving boxing.
Okay. Oh, that sounds like a family filled with sports. So what are the ongoing projects you're currently working on that our students of color can look into to find out potentially how they get involved, or just to find out more about what Think Beyond is working in?
Sure. So I work for two companies, really. They're sister companies, Think Beyond, which is our consultancy, and Beyond Sport, which is a convening organisation, a campaigning and advocacy one, and we celebrate and fund those sports that really use sports in the best way to achieve and contribute towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So on the Beyond Sport website, which is just beyondsport.org, if you were to go onto the network section, you'll see over 2,800 organisations in a database there that you can filter by sport, by country, by subject matter, and see what organisations around the world are doing using sport. And it's a brilliant resource. It's everything from sports role in STEM education to the work we're currently doing, supported by Dick's Sporting Goods in the US, bringing together a suite of experts and experts on the ground to develop and identify and create some curriculum and guidelines around tackling institutionalized racism in sport in the US. We're doing some amazing stuff funded by a wide range of corporate funders and charitable funders called the Sport for Good Response Fund, which is around how the sport for good sector can survive this period of time. So it's three sort of types of support. We've given out 38, I think it is, immediate grants to help those small NGOs from around the world get over this first period and stay afloat. We've been curating and delivering facilitated design thinking roundtables with experts to help organisations tackle specific issues in a slightly more deep dive way. And then we've got a smaller number of organisations that are able to access strategic consultancy support from myself and a colleague for some long-term planning that they wouldn't otherwise be able to access, and that's paid for by some funders. So that's some really exciting stuff. And then on the other side, and the client side, if you were to go to our Think Beyond website and see our consultancy, and it's just canyouthinkbeyond.com, we've got some brilliant clients at the moment, and we're doing such exciting stuff with them. We always put on a range of, we've obviously had to pivot all of our work through Beyond Sport and deliver, as a convening organisation, in-person events have been a big part of our business, and we've pivoted to do that online, and we've been able to engage in a different and new and exciting and vivid way using a range of different platforms. And our events are very accessible, and you can sign up, and some of them are free, some of them are paid for. We've had various partnerships with Bucks in the past to open up access to students, so that they're able to engage with them. So there's some amazing stuff going on in the sport for good sector, as well as in the consultancy side of things, which for me is around how do we help businesses do better business and do better things for the world in partnership with the people on the ground doing the good stuff. How do we bring business objectives and social objectives in line together, as they now need to be for the consumers of the future, the workers of the future, the leaders of the future. And that's the really exciting bit. And I'm lucky I get to do the bit that's about facilitating ideas, coming up with ideas, helping people unlock their thoughts and combine them together, and then hosting events and engaging organisations and audiences in conversations that they didn't know they needed to have. I do get to do that fun stuff, and sport has been the pathway for all of it, really.
The sport has indeed been the enabler. Thank you so much, Radha. Thank you so much. This was amazing. I'm sure our students will benefit to find out, much more about what your organization and sister organization are working on. So yeah, thank you.
This is great. Good to chat. Do you want a cameo from Ralph the dog?
Yes.
Ralphie, come on, you ready? His name is Ralph Barnesy Balani, named after my favourite footballer. Hey, aren't you?
I am not surprised.
He's got a great left foot as well, haven't you, bud?
Oh,
there you go.
Oh, so cute.